record this real quick. But this one is going to be about looping, this for of loop, and then continuing from there, okay? So for a while loop, again, we've just taken a look at if statements to the last one, and the statement was if condition, then something happens. What we're going to change to now is introducing this type of while loop that's there, okay? So a while loop is something that you can consider as while something is true, do something else. Do something like this one, okay? Cool. This one is going to be hello world with loops and arrays. And in my script up here, I'm just going to go ahead and do an inspection for my console. See here. And this console, I just want to go ahead and make something pop up here. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new variable, and I'll call it num, and let me set it equal to 0. And so we'll see here that I have my if statement that we've used to work with. So if I said something like if num is less than 10, then console.log or print something like or we could actually go ahead and just print out the num, okay? You'll see how I get 0 pretty easily, because if num is less than 10, num is less than 10. Now, an issue here that we can introduce is actually, let's just say, how about instead of saying if, I want to do something that says while num is less than 10. So what a while loop does is essentially check condition. My condition is num is less than 10, and it's going to say while my number is less than 10, console.log number. What do folks think might happen if I run this code here? Let's see here. I'm going to try to refresh this guy. You'll notice, I should probably stop it before it breaks my computer. Okay, one sec. So you'll notice I'm in 10,000 iterations. Oh gosh, 1 second run. I shouldn't do that. Okay. So don't do that on your end. Sorry,
Your machine is going to explode.
Yeah. So that was just an example of what not to do there. So what you could do here again, the issue that we saw is that my while loop keeps running nonstop because my condition never reaches a part to exit the condition. So this condition of num is less than 10 is always true. So whatever piece of code I have inside of here is always going to run forever. And so what I want to do is somehow either tell it to terminate that condition by getting this statement to not be true or to be true in other scenarios. To not be true, num is less than 10, what needs to happen? Num needs to increase to a value that is greater than 10. So I could say something where I say num is equal to num plus 1. Okay. Let's go to my console. Cool. And now I'm counting. So now I have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. While 9 is less than 10, print 9, increment 9 plus 1, 10. While 10 is less than 10, 10 isn't less than 10 because so it exits it. And it exits the condition because the condition isn't true. If I do the same thing here, looks a little weird. Here we go. I get from 0 up to 10. Now, that's essentially what the basics of a while loop is, and that's how you can kind of make them into your code. And again, a while loop is going to be something, let's see here. Or excuse me, a while loop is something that you kind of implement into your code. So like while button is pressed, while it is hovering over something as well. So what you could say is you could get a HTML element document ID, and then you can check if there's a stylistic truthness to it, is if there's an a hover style on it, and then while that's true, you can do something in your code. Okay. So another thing that we could do though is if we want to make sure that my condition is executed at least one time to make sure that it happens, you could do something called a do while. A do while is something that ensures that this guy will notice here that when I have my oops, let's see here. This is the general format. So a do while is very similar to a while loop. What it's asking you to do is it ensures that this do statement runs at least once. You'll notice I get the same output, but nothing really changes here. But the difference here is that if I put var num is equal to 10, I actually get my 10 printed out. Whereas if I had num is equal to 10 down here, and while num is less than 10, console.log num, you'll notice that that one doesn't work. So a do statement, the entire point of this do statement before a while statement is to make sure it runs at least once. And so you might encounter a scenario where you're like, I don't know how long a while loop is going to run for, but I need to make sure that this happens at least once. That's where it is. And that's another aspect of a while loop in comparison to a for loop, is a while loop is something that can run indefinitely. Okay? Cool. So the next thing that we can kind of look at here, so let me briefly check this guy out. Cool. So there's going to be several loops in JavaScript. There's going to be a while loop, a do loop with the condition at the bottom, and then there's going to be a for loop that has a bunch of functionality in its heading. And this one is going to be the most complicated type of loop. It provides a lot of power with a lot of this code. So when do you want to use a for loop? A for loop is going to be used when you know the exact number of iterations that you want to do. When do you know the exact number of iterations? Well, how about we count down as it says here, from 10 down until 1, and then we print out liftoff after it. Let's go ahead and see if we can do that. And before we do it, though, I just want to take a look at the syntax. The for loop syntax, the general idea, the semantics is that before the start of the first loop iteration, you execute the initialization component. Now, that's a fancy way of saying an indexer or a value that will keep track of where you are in your loop. The second component, this condition, is identical to the condition of a while loop. You call that one the loop invariant, something that needs to be checked during your loop to make sure that it needs to continue or not. What was our condition for this guy? While num is less than 10. Going to be the exact same thing over here. And the update condition essentially will tell us what to do after this condition is met. So if this is true, or excuse me, if this condition hasn't broken our loop yet, we need to update our code to get to the next step to break that condition. So a while loop, let's just go ahead and remake our while loop. Var num is equal to 0. And what I can see here is while num is less than 10, console.log, and then after it breaks out, console.log liftoff. Let's do it this way. Uh-oh. I made the previous error again. Sorry, everyone. Second time I did that, sorry. Okay. Cool. We'll see here on my console, I get the 0, 1, 0 to 9, then liftoff. And for a for loop, though, what I'm going to need to do is make this condition. So I need to make an initializer. So for I usually use I. That's what everyone does as well. I is equal to 0. And then we need conditions. So what's the condition I have? I is less than 10, like so. And what is the what's the increment that we need to go up by? Well, we'll notice that in a while loop we manually went up by 1, but in a for loop we can actually add that in as a plus plus. So what a plus plus will do for us is essentially say, hey, go ahead and do a plus plus of 1 to 10, or excuse me, 1 up to 2. And you'll see here if I log my I after this, does everyone see I'm getting the exact same logic? So I start off at 0. That's my initializer. I have a condition. If this condition is met, if this loop invariant works, I then go to my update variable. Okay? I'm going to toss this guy into the bottom down there as well. Cool. We'll see here I get liftoff. So these two loops are identical. And again, what's the difference? The difference is that you use a for loop when you know the number of iterations that you want to use. You use a while loop when you don't know the number of iterations. Either one works out though, as long as you kind of know what you're doing with them. Either one is applicable for situations. For loops are generally used a lot more when we come to arrays though, and we'll show us why with arrays. So before we kind of look at, I'll comment out the console log so that it's easier to see. The purpose of a for loop is pretty much used. Let's see here. Is it going to show us the arrays? Sorry, everyone. Okay, so it's not giving us. It kind of jumps into collections a bit quickly here in the code. Here. Oh, it's not doing it directly. Okay, so what I want to show everyone right now is how arrays work in a in JavaScript. And arrays again are a collection of objects. So if I go ahead and make, let's just say, what's let's just call it languages, something like this. What we could say here is, let's just say that we know our we're talking about coding languages or something. I know that we have Python, then we have JavaScript, then we have Java, but you'll notice that all of this is a single string object, right? And you might be wondering, well, you know what? I'll go ahead and make languages 1 then, and maybe I'll put JavaScript in there, Java here. What happens if I told you, okay, well, make a list of 400 languages? You'll have to make 400 variables. And that's not good for us at all. That's where it gets a bit out of hand. So the way that we can actually use a collection of data is by using what we call arrays. And arrays store data together. And the data that we're going to be storing here, we call them langs for the time being, just so it's easy to reference, is representations of each language that we are coding in. See, JavaScript is one. And you'll notice when I made an empty array is 2 brackets. So if you press shift and left bracket, it's to the left of the delete key, and then to the left of the key that's to the left of the delete key. Those 2 brackets, they're also the curly brace brackets, but they're the non-curly ones. These pretty much say, okay, I have a collection. Now, what we would say in here now inside this collection is our first name of our piece of code, JavaScript. Let's go ahead and use Java. And let's use Python. Let's say C as well. I think C Sharp's another one. Okay. So these are all the other languages we have. And we'll see here that we kind of want to use a way to iterate through each of these guys. So now, instead of having to declare language 1, language 2, language 3, and language 4, I just declared a single line of code that kind of compose of all of them together. And if I actually log my languages now, you'll see here that the output in your console log is super helpful. If you go ahead and you click the arrow, you'll notice that it actually indexes and it gives you the length of the array. So each of the items in an array, we always start counting from 0, and each of these have an index represented for it. So if I say, can you get me the item at index 2, you're going to go from 0, 1, 2, and it will be Python. Now, that's hard to remember because you start counting from 1 in real life a lot, but you kind of start counting from 0 here. in console.log, it actually makes a really neat way of showing you the index and the element at the index there. Okay, cool. So that's kind of what an array is, and the reason that we use it is to make sure that we kind of store things together a lot easier in order for us to look at them. Okay.
If I don't know, if in console you want to refer to specifically Python instead of lengths, should I open like a new parenthesis inside length parenthesis and type 3?
So awesome, right? So it wouldn't be parentheses here, but it will actually be another set of curly brackets. So if you want to, this is what we call indexing an array. So if I want to get a specific element from the array like Python, I'll go ahead and index. I think, Joy, you said tree, so let's actually try it out with tree. We try to redo this. And unfortunately, it looks like I'm getting C. Why am I getting C here instead of Python?
It's JavaScript is 0, so Python should be 2.
Awesome. Great work. That's just something after a while you'll get familiar with. But now you'll see here I'm getting Python out here. And this is the entire purpose of an array, is to store things for us, okay? Now I want to showcase 2 ways we can go through an array here. One of them, and then again, it might be up to you on how you want to do it. The first way that I'm going to show us is by using this new type of loop called the for of loop. Now, what you're going to for the for of loop is a bit different than what you've seen before, because you don't need to worry about the parts of a for loop. You don't worry about that. A for of loop is used when you want elements. And what I mean by elements is JavaScript, Java, Python, and C. So if I want to print out every element in an array, I use a for of loop. You could also do this with any loop also. It doesn't matter, but this one's kind of built for this purpose. So what we could do here essentially is we say this keyword for, and then we create a variable that we make up. I'm going to call it item, and then after you type out the variable of that you made up, you say for item of the array that you created, I'm going to say console.log item. You'll see here that I get each item in my array. So I get Python. That was from the previous line. But now I get JavaScript, Java, Python, C, and C#. So that's what the for of loop is. And if you just want to loop through every item in an array, print them out to the user or do something, then that's how we would do it, okay? Now, from last session's lecture, you might notice that that's not how we did it. And the alternative way that you can loop through an array is by using for loops. And the reason that you would want to use a for loop is you want to maybe manipulate something in the index, or you want to use the indexing of your array to see what's happening. So if you want to kind of manipulate the elements, that's how we would do it. And again, very similar to what we said before, a for loop starts with the keyword for, and then we initialize the start guy. So this is the initializer. He's mostly going to be at 0, but in the example in the book, as you can see here, you can actually go up from 10. In this example right here, you could start at for let I is equal to 10. So we go from 10, I is greater than 0, and we do a minus minus to decrement. So we go down the way instead of going up the way. Now, after I have this guy at I is equal to 0, what I can do now is figure out my condition. Now, as we saw up here, we saw a good point. I want to get Python of 2. Let me go ahead and get C#. So I can get a C# by printing out this guy. Oops. Let me comment this out really quick. We'll see I get C# at this line here at line 26. But what happens if I go ahead and print out index 5 at this guy? We will get an undefined. So this JavaScript is nicer with this than other ones, but essentially what's happening is that we have an index out of bounds error because we're trying to reference an index value that doesn't exist in this array. So index 5 doesn't exist. Only index 0 to 4 exists. Okay.
Any other language would crash the application, right?
Yeah, it would crash. It would say index out of bounds error. That's what it would say. Exception index out of bounds. And you're if you're doing Java or Python, you'll get really familiar with that error. I know I did. So, but for the time being here, let's just try to kind of get our logic working. There's a method I want to show us that's built into nearly every language. You can actually go ahead and type out the array name. I called this langs. And the array langs has a dot length associated with it. You'll see it's 5. Now, if we actually expand this logic a little bit, if I go ahead and add one more value to this, like Swift is Apple's language, you'll notice it works okay for everything. And I go up to a 6, and now I'm most likely able to use my 5. Okay, I get Swift. But now instead of going up to 5, I can get 6. Now I'll get an undefined. So what's happening here, the relationship between your indexes and your length, and this will be true for all of eternity, or for as long as we start counting from 0, is that the, let me put down here, the index bounds are from 0 up to array.length minus 1. So essentially, if I have an array that has 6 items in it, my index values are from 0 to 5. Okay? Because the first item starts at 0. If I have an array with 100 items in it, I have 100 elements in my array. My array values, my index values are from 0 to 99. If I have an array with 1,000, my index values are from 0 to 999. That's how it works. So the relationships of your bounds that you want to go through with your indexes, starting from 0, is 0 to array length, and then you have the minus 1 there. Now, how do we actually code this in the for loop? Well, we say I is equal to 0, and for our condition, to make sure that we're respecting the condition of array length minus 1, we do I less than, and in this scenario, my array is called langs. So I'm going to say I is less than langs.length. And again, this less than symbol is exclusive. So it doesn't include the value of langs.length. So if langs.length is 6, this goes from 0 up to, but not including 6. Okay. So that's the entire idea. I'm very particular about that just because it's something that's very confusing and it's a bit hard to wrap your head around. But again, if you're working with these indexes, this is why you'd want to do it. And this is why we cannot do equal to, because that would include 6, and then you'll break your program, you get an index out of bounds error. Okay. Cool. And now I got my increment here, my I++, and that's going to go ahead and increment my value of I up a little bit there. So that's what I'm doing with that guy. And now what we can do here is actually, we'll notice that I, if we print out I, we saw up here, we printed out each element. And I'll go ahead and just comment out these guys, reference them. We got JavaScript, Java, Python, C, C#, and Swift. We got the length of our array, and now we actually got 6, and we got 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the index values, I is actually the index value. So the term that we like to use is that this is called looping by element, and this is called looping by index. And the reason that we're looping by index is that I is the index. Up here, item is, or if you call this I up here, for I of langs, then I would be the item or the element. Okay. So how do I actually print out the indexes here? Let me do print index. If I do console.log, I can actually go ahead and call langs again, and I can say, why don't you actually log langs index I? We just saw earlier that these indexes are what this one is. We'll see here, index 0, print out JavaScript, index 1, print out Java, index 2, print out Python, so forth. Okay. So that was a lot of looping all at once in a very short amount of time. Is anyone confused by these different loops or the syntax behind them? Again, these guys are all recorded too if you wanted to rewatch them, but I figured this is a shorter because yesterday we kind of sped through a lot. I wanted to just kind of hyper focus on arrays and how they work here. Okay. Now, a nice thing again about JavaScript is that it's very dynamic, so it doesn't care about the items in the array. So you can put Boolean values, numbers, and strings into an array, and it won't make a difference. Java and C, you can't do that. Okay. Cool. So now this is different ways that you can loop through your array, and this will be very helpful for your project 4. So in project 4, what you're going to try to do is get the items from the list and then try to loop through them together. And the way that we can do that again, see here, see if I can briefly show an example of it. I'm going to make an input of text is equal to, or you know what? I'll just make a regular input. The ID is going to be entry. Let's see if this guy works. Okay, so now I have a text field. I'm going to go ahead and put a button underneath it. So I'm going to say input ID is equal to button. I'm going to say, I don't need an ID for this one. Type is equal to button. And then on click, I'm going to try to run a function that I make up here underneath all this array stuff. So let me go ahead and make a function up here. I'm going to call this function get text. And then on click, I'm going to run this function that's called get text. Okay. And now what I could do here,
What's up with the empty parentheses?
these guys right here.
Yeah.
Great question. So this is what we call a parameter list in a function. So every function can take in a parameter. Essentially, it's a bit more complicated when we're working with HTML, but for our purposes here, if I create a function called getVal, and I add something into here like entry, I just made this word up. I'm going to call this AX actually for the time being. I can console.log AX. Now you'll see here, if I rerun my code, go to my console, nothing happens just yet, but if I actually go ahead and call my function getVal, I'm going to say getVal. And do you notice here, usually when we open up getVal or getText, let me do a getText really quick. You'll see that it has nothing inside of it, but getVal actually has this AX any. Now, what does that mean? Well, what happens if I put 50 inside of here? GetVal of 50. You see how 50 popped up down here? Let me call it one more time. Now I have 150. So what this does is it takes in a parameter that you can now use in the function. And this is where you might be passing values between different functions or whatever. What's the point of doing this? Well, how about I make this function named getVal add2, and I take in a value called x. I could say, let me call it, I'll call it add2. X is equal to x plus 2, console.log x. So let me add 2 to 5. Let me add 2 to 10. Let me add 2 to 20. You'll see down here, I get 7, 12, and 22. Because whatever I put in here gets placed there. Now, can I have multiple of parameters? Yes, you can have an infinite amount of parameters, but one is usually good for right now. Okay. And if you have multiple parameters, you'll need to make sure they're named differently. And if you don't have the proper amount, JavaScript might run it because they're not using it. But if I do console.log, you'll see I get undefined. JavaScript's nicer with it. In some other languages, it will give you an error if you're referencing a parameter that doesn't exist. But essentially what's happening is that these empty parentheses here are parameterless that you can then use to use in your code later with functions. Does that help a bit with that one?
Kind of, yeah.
Sure.
Maybe when you have like practice with that, should be clear in my mind.
So the main thing is that if you're not working with values from down here to be placed up here, then this is usually empty. Your parameter list is usually empty. If you need to take in a value from outside, like get value add to, then we go ahead and we put a parameter in there because we're going to say, give me a value and I'm going to add 2 to it and then give it somewhere else. So it's kind of
basically, if I wanted to replicate this equation, okay, x equals x plus 2, and I want x to be a random number, so I can create different values inside of get val add 2, and I can make them go randomly, and the computer will choose for me. The
Perfect.
AI would choose for me.
Yeah.
That's how you use it, basically?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Good. Cool. Nice. So it is, so I'm a little bit over. Let me just try to see if I can get the text here for us. So I'm just going to go ahead and get the, I'm going to call it element is equal to document dot get element by ID. The ID I'm going to get is entry. And then I'm going to see if I can grab, I think it's value here. There we go. So now I'm getting the test from down here. So if I do on click down here, and let me add the value to this button that says get user text. Okay. Okay, so now I can get the entry that the user typed in of test. And again, for your project, what you're doing is you're splitting each of these guys into elements. So what you can do is say something like user entry is equal to lem.value. And then array is equal to user entry dot split. And you can split by we saw this yesterday, we can split by any amount of parameter. Also, Jaws, another example, this is a parameter for the split method. So that's why you'd want parameters. So an empty parameter tells you not to split it, but the split method says, what do you want me to split by, the user? So you provided a parameter of either a colon or a string or a space, and it uses that to split it. That's where the parameter comes in. So the split method most likely looks like this. Probably like that, where it says car inside of there, or character, however you pronounce it. Okay. But we could see here, now I could go ahead, console.log this array. Nice. And now I have a neat little array that pretty much puts each of my items into a list item there. And now I can use these different methods to go ahead and loop through this array of items when I see fit.